Let us pray. God, we thank you so much for your faithfulness to us. God, we thank you for the lives that you have created, the lives of the people that we come to honor tonight who really try to reach and work on behalf of those who are on the margins. God, I pray that as we enter this economic downturn, that you would give us wisdom and you would help us to be bridge builders for those who are employed and struggling, unemployed and underemployed. God, I pray that you would be with us tonight as we begin and open up this celebration of those who labor on your behalf. God, we thank you for the work that you have inspired in them, and we thank you for the way that it has transformed our lives and our communities. Be glorified in this place. In God's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. That was Professor Marla Fredericks, who only found out 10 minutes ago that Reverend Peter Gomes was ill. So that's not bad for prayer for 10 minutes. Give it up for Marla Fredericks. I mean, when you hit that list of underfunded and underspent, and I thought you were going to say underendowed, because our endowment is under. And we need to pray it back to its healthy levels pre-economic crisis. Let's give it up to the brothers and sisters of Kumba, ladies and gentlemen, for that rousing rendition of Lift Every Voice in Church. Good afternoon, everyone. Hey, come on, give us Friday evening. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. That's what I'm talking about. Now, it's so good to see everyone here this afternoon for this celebration of the accomplishments of the four individuals on the stage with Professor Higginbotham and me. The four individuals whose lives and achievements we've all come together to celebrate and honor with Harvard's highest award for contributions to African and African American life and culture, and that, of course, is the great W.E.B. Du Bois Medal. And I would like to thank the Institute of Politics here at the Kennedy School. Bill Purcell's right there, the director. I'd like to thank you for your generosity and for co-hosting this event. Give it up to Bill. In honoring these four great people here on the stage, we're also honoring the greatest black scholar and intellectual of all time, the great W.E.B. Du Bois, who graduated from Fisk in 1888 and then took 3 degrees from Harvard, the A.B. in 1890, the A.M. in history in 1891, and the Ph.D. in history in 1895, becoming the first African American to earn a Ph.D. in any field from Harvard. Du Bois went on to write 22 books. He co-founded the Niagara Movement, which in 1905, which in 1909 metamorphosed itself into the NAACP. He served for 24 years as the founding editor of the Crisis magazine, and he ended his life as the editor of the Encyclopedia Africana Project in Accra, Ghana. He died at the age of 95. The last thing that he did before he died was to sit down and write out a message which was wired to Martin Luther King. And the night before the Great March on Washington, the next day, Roy Wilkins, who was the MC that day, read out the contents of the cable, and then he announced that Dr. Du Bois had died in his sleep upon sending that cable. We honor Du Bois's memory with the annual award of the medal named in his honor and engraved with his image, as you can see on your programs and on the screen. But we also honor his memory through his words. So our format this afternoon will include tributes to each of our four medalists made by persons who know them well. And in between these presentations, members of the Department of African and African American Studies will read segments of Du Bois's greatest work, and that, of course, is The Souls of Black Folk, published in 1903 and hailed as a classic virtually even before the ink was dry. Dr. Du Bois was many things, but first and foremost, he was a writer. As a Yale-educated scholar, William Ferris put it as early as 1913, Du Bois, and I quote, is one of the few men in history who was hurled on the throne of leadership by the dynamic force of the word. He is one of the few writers who leaped to the front as a leader and became the head of a popular movement through impressing his personality upon men by means of a single book. And this, if you think about it, is something at which we all should marvel. Our colleagues will be reading their favorite passages of this marvelously influential and still resonant work of lyrical insight. My own favorite passage comes from his essay of the training of black men, and I'll read you 2 paragraphs from that. Herein the longing of black men must have respect, the rich and bitter depth of their experience, the unknown treasures of their inner life, the strange rendings of nature they have seen, may give the world new points of view and make their loving, their living, and doing precious to all human hearts, and to themselves in these the days that try their souls, the chance to soar in the dim blue air above the smoke, is to their finer spirits boon and guerdon for what they lose on earth by being black. I sit with Shakespeare, and he winces not. Across the color line, I move arm in arm with Balzac and Dumas, where smiling men and welcoming women glide in gilded halls. From out the caves of evening that swing between the strong-limbed earth and the tracery of the stars, I summon Aristotle and Aurelius and what soul I will, and they come, all, graciously, with no scorn nor condescension. So wed with truth, I dwell above the veil. Is this the life you grudge us, O knightly America? Is this the life you long to change into the dull red hideousness of Georgia? Are you so afraid lest peering from the high Pisgah between Philistine and Amalekite, we sight the promised land? And now, ladies and gentlemen, let us celebrate the 2008 recipients of the W.E.B. Du Bois Medal. They who also, with Du Bois, are wed with truth and dwell above the veil. Let's give it up for Tammy Robinson, Richard Plebler, Ingrid Saunders Jones, and Tavis Smile.
Well, I'd like to say greetings on behalf of the Department of African and African American Studies. I'm the chair of that department, and we are just honored to have these great role models with us today. I'm reading from The Souls of Black Folk, the chapter on Alexander Crummell. It's called Of Alexander Crummell. So the man groped for light. All this was not life. It was the world wondering of a soul in search of itself, the striving of one who vainly sought his place in the world, ever haunted by the shadow of a death that is more than death, the passing of a soul that has missed its duty. 20 years he wandered, 20 years and more, and yet the hard, rasping question kept gnawing within him. What in God's name am I on earth for? In the narrow New York parish, his soul seemed cramped and smothered. In the fine old air of the English university, he heard the millions wailing over the sea. In the wild, fever-cursed swamps of Africa, he stood helpless and alone. You will not wonder at his weird pilgrimage, you who in the swift whirl of living and its cold paradox and marvelous vision have fronted life and asked its riddle face to face. And if you find that riddle hard to read, remember that yonder black boy finds it just a little harder. If it is difficult for you to find and face your duty, it is a shade more difficult for him. If your heart sickens in the blood and dust of battle, remember that to him the dust is thicker and the battle fiercer. No wonder the wanderers fail. No wonder we point to thief and murderer and haunting prostitute and the never-ending throng of unhearsed dead. The valley of the shadow of death gives few of its pilgrims back to the world. But Alexander Crummell, it did give back. Out of the temptation of hate and burned by the fire of despair, triumphant over doubt and steeled by sacrifice against humiliation, he turned at last home across the waters, humble and strong, gentle and determined. He bent to all the jibes and prejudices, to all hatred and discrimination, with that rare courtesy which is the armor of pure souls. He fought among his own, the low, the grasping, and the wicked, with that unbending righteousness, which is the sword of the just. He never faltered. He seldom complained. He simply worked, inspiring the young, rebuking the old, helping the weak, guiding the strong. So he grew and brought within his wide influence all that was best of those who walk within the veiled. And now that he is gone, I sweep the veil away and cry low, the soul to whose dear memory I bring this little tribute. I can see his face still, dark and heavy laden, heavy lined beneath his snowy hair, lighting and shading now with inspiration for the future, now in innocent pain at some human wickedness, now with sorrow at some hard memory. The more I met Alexander Crummell, the more I felt how much that world was losing which knew so little of him. In another age, he might have stood among the elders of the land in purple-bordered togas. In another country, mothers might have slung him to the cradles. He did his work, he did it nobly and well, and yet I sorrow that here he worked alone with so little human sympathy. His name today in this broad land means little and comes to 50 million ears laden with no incense or emulation. And herein lies the tragedy of the age. Not that men are poor. All men know something of poverty. Not that men are wicked. Who is good? Not that men are ignorant. What is truth? No, but that men know so little of men. Thank you.
I'm Paula Kerger from PBS, and I want to congratulate all four of you. Good to see you here, Tavis. But I'm here today to talk specifically about my dear friend Tammy Robinson. You know, it's not often in life that one has the opportunity to tell someone face to face what they've meant to them and to the people around them. And it's a great privilege to have that opportunity on an occasion like this. Tammy is one of a handful of people, I think largely unsung, who have truly shaped public television. As a young woman in Philly, fresh from Temple, she went to WHYY, our station there in Philadelphia, where she began her career in public television as a producer. From there, she went to PBS, where she worked in the programming division. And Tammy has often told the story of how she literally cut and pasted our broadcast schedule together using strips of paper that she laid out on the floor. I know that'll put terror in some of the younger people's heart. That's really how it was done. She later took on programming jobs at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, at the National Endowment for the Humanities, at WNET New York. She had a brief sojourn on the other side of the aisle at CBS Cable. But then she came back home to public television, where she achieved some of her most important accomplishments of her career, particularly as SVP of Cultural Programming at WETA in Washington, where she created In Performance at the White House, Smithsonian World, and the National Geographic specials. I first met Tammy when she came to WNET in 1995 as Vice President of Programming. I remember when our colleague Warden Chamberlain came to WNET and had been charged with revamping our programming. He looked around and he said, "I better bring Tammy up here right away." So he talked her out of leaving her beloved Washington, coming to New York, and indeed she revamped our productions. She focused on some of the great series of public broadcasting that were already underway, series like Great Performances and American Masters in Nature. She was responsible for launching 2 new icon series, Wide Angle and Cyber Chase. But she was also instrumental in helping us expand our work and creating a range of limited series and specials, everything from Broadway to Frontier House, in fact, the entire House series, to the Rise and Fall of Jim Crow, to the quirky Egg series, to African American Lives with Skip Gates, just to name a few. It's worth pausing a moment to say that you've seen nothing until you've seen Skip and Tammy together. I'm not going to say anything else about that now, but if you want to know some real stories, grab me after this event. He's laughing, yeah. Her commitment to quality, integrity, and directing public television programming to truly reflect our nation's diversity is second to none and is reflected in all of the awards that she's won. Now, I've told you a little bit about what her bio says, but let me tell you a little bit about the woman behind this impressive resume. Tammy is a gifted teacher. I don't know anyone that I've ever worked with that is more committed to mentoring and encouraging those that are coming up. Tammy has the highest standards and, believe me, does not suffer fools. Her BS meter is really quite high. She's fair and objective. She's an honest counselor. She will always tell you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear. And believe me, in these days, that's extraordinarily rare. She is one of the most generous people that I have ever met in my life. And the thing about her that is most remarkable is she does it quietly. She's creative, she's tenacious, and she's fierce in standing up for what she believes. And for those of us who've had the good fortune to work alongside her, she is abidingly loyal and possesses the most wicked sense of humor of anyone that I know. She's made a profound impact on millions of Americans who have been entertained, educated, and inspired by the programs that she has shaped. She has touched so many people within our public television family, and for her friends and family, she has earned both respect and love. I cannot help but think, Tammy, that Sandy is looking down on us today. And she's smiling, and she's also wishing that she could be here to tell some of the other stories of the amazing adventures of the Robinson girls as they've traveled around the world. My dear friend, you've meant the world to me, and you've taught me a great deal, and you've inspired me to work even harder to uphold all that's important. I can't think of anyone more deserving of you, of this great honor.
Thank you, Paul. That was lovely. Fiercely independent and committed to nurturing independence in the artists and creative teams she works with, Tammy Robinson, though a city girl through and through, probably would have done quite well in the series Frontier House, an experimental history program that she shepherded in 2002. In this program, 3 American families were transplanted to 1883 Montana, where they faced the challenges of winter on the frontier. One feature frequently remarked upon was the fact that one of the families was biracial. And such is the way we've learned American history in the classroom, that the frontier has become an all-white place in the American imagination. But to people in Montana in 1883, this wouldn't have come as such a surprise. Populated as the western frontier in fact was, with whites including Jews, with African Americans, with Hispanics, with Asians, and of course, with Native Americans. Tammy, an industry leader in bringing diversity to television, led the efforts to integrate Frontier House, to have the 3 striving families look like they might have looked back in 1883, rather than looking like our idea of what they looked like over a century later. This is where Tammy's independence comes in, and where she has been a force for positive change at PBS, both in front of and behind the camera. As Vice President and Director of Programming at Channel 13, WNET in New York, in myriad programs besides Frontier House, she has helped create a television landscape that more closely resembles the American landscape by insisting on a greater diversity and a broad array of subjects in public television's offerings. She has helped PBS, well, I borrow, Paula, your slogan here. She has helped PBS be more. Bill Grant, her colleague at 13, summed up Tammy's position in the television industry economically when I asked him for an observation last week. And I quote, "Tammy has been an absolutely critical figure in bringing African American history to television and then into our classroom. It's her commitment not only to entertainment, but also, ladies and gentlemen, to education that makes the best and brightest independent filmmakers want to work with Tammy Robinson, and that has garnered numerous awards across her brilliant career." Bill reminded me that when WNET had the opportunity to join in the production of a series which Paula mentioned called The Rise and Fall of Jim Crow, Tammy faced the indifference of her bosses at both WNET and PBS. Paula wasn't the president of PBS at that time. Through what he referred to as, quote, the considerable force of her personality, an understatement for sure, she got WNET to sign on to the project and then went ahead and raised the rest of the money for it herself and literally forced a reluctant PBS system to broadcast it. You can probably see what's coming next in my remarks. The Rise and Fall of Jim Crow won a George Foster Peabody Award, TV's highest honor. That this series still has a prominent place in the classrooms around the country is glowing testament to how good programming can teach us, enrich us, and make us better, more knowledgeable citizens. Tammy Robinson knows good programming, having been at the fore of it in public television for many, many years. As Vice President and Director of Programming at 13, she oversaw such PBS stalwarts as Nature, Great Performances, and American Masters. Tammy arrived at NET in 1995 with considerable accomplishments and formidable talent already. She began her career, as Paula said, in public television at WHYY in Philadelphia, and later served as Senior Vice President of Cultural Affairs Programming at WETA in D.C. Over the course of her career, she has shown unflagging commitment to programming that reflects the true diversity of our country, and in particular, the history and culture of the African American people, having shepherded programs such as Marian Anderson, I'll Make Me a World, a century of African American artists, Slavery and the Making of America, and it bears mentioning again The Rise and Fall of Jim Crow. Tammy's range as a producer is remarkably impressive, and she has also been one of public television's strongest advocates of programming in science, in religion, and in ethics. In addition to the Peabody Award, she has won a Primetime Emmy and received several Emmys and Cine Golden Eagle nominations. Tammy has brought more color and richer shading to public television, and she has influenced not only what we watch, but also, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps most importantly of all, the way we watch. It is an honor for Evelyn and I to present Tammy Robinson with the Du Bois Medal for her contributions to the arts, to culture, and to the life of the mind.
This is heavy. I feel like an Olympic person.
Yeah, you are.
While I was told to keep my remarks short, they are heartfelt. Thank you, thank you, thank you for this marvelous medal. It is something that I will cherish forever. I only wish that my beloved grandmother, mother, and sister were here to share this with me this evening. This means a lot to me at this point in my career. So I won't hog the mic because I could go on forever. And we have 3 other wonderful people here for you to hear and learn about this evening. Thank you for the award again. Bye-bye.
Good evening. My name is William Julius Wilson, and I have the distinct pleasure of reading a passage from the Souls of Black Folks, specifically a brief passage from the chapter entitled Of the Training of Black Men. 50 years ago, the ability of Negro students in any appreciable numbers to master a modern college course would have been difficult to prove. Today it is proved by the fact that 400 Negroes, many of whom have been reported as brilliant students, have received a bachelor's degree from Harvard, Yale, Oberlin, and 70 other leading colleges. Here we have then nearly 2,500 Negro graduates, of whom the crucial query must be made. How far did their training fit them for life? It is, of course, extremely difficult to collect satisfactory data on such a point, difficult to reach the men, to get trustworthy testimony, and to gauge that testimony by any generally acceptable criterion of success. In 1900, the conference at Atlanta University undertook to study these graduates and published the results. First, they sought to know what these graduates were doing and succeeded in getting answers from nearly 2/3 of the living. The direct testimony was, in almost all cases, corroborated by the reports of the colleges where they graduated, so that in the main, the reports were worthy of credence. 53% of these graduates were teachers, presidents of institutions, heads of normal schools, principals of city school systems, and the like. 17% were clergymen. Another 17% were in the professions, chiefly as physicians. Over 6% were merchants, farmers, and artisans, and 4% were in the government civil service. Granting even that a considerable proportion of the third unheard from or unsuccessful, this is a record of usefulness. Personally, I know many hundreds of these graduates and have corresponded with more than 1,000. Through others, I have followed carefully the life work of scores. I have taught some of them, and some of the pupils whom they have taught lived in homes which they have built and looked at life through their eyes. Comparing them as a class with my fellow students in New England and Europe, I cannot hesitate in saying that nowhere have I met men and women with a broader spirit of helpfulness, with deeper devotion to their life work, or with more consecrated determination to succeed in the face of bitter difficulties than among Negro college-bred men. They have, to be sure, their proportion of ne'er-do-wells, their pedants, and lettered fools, but they have a surprising small proportion of them. They have not that culture of manner which we instinctively associate with university men, forgetting that in reality it is the heritage from cultured homes, and that no people, a generation removed from slavery, can escape a certain unpleasant rawness, despite the best of training. Thank you.
Good evening. Congratulations to all of you. I am by training a news reporter, and we were taught a few things before we were sent out in the world. One of the most important, I thought at the time, was not to assume anything. It would often embarrass you to do so. Not to stereotype people, not to see things as you thought they were before you'd investigated, not to judge a book by its cover. I was later thrust out of that job. That stood me in good stead as a reporter. It proved true on any number of occasions. Rough-looking Irish detectives with marine haircuts turned out to be very sensitive souls who were trying to do good and were not the least bit malevolent. And somebody ragged who was struggling on a drug corner in West Baltimore turned out to be one of the most inquisitive and heartwarming relationships I ever had the pleasure to enjoy. At some point, I was thrust into the world of entertainment, and I went to work for HBO, and I met this fellow named Richard Plebler. And just on the tan alone, on that magnificent pallor, can you call it pallor? I don't know, but when I met him, we were working on the corner together. Richard was preparing to find some reception on Capitol Hill for a show we did called The Corner. And this fellow comes up to me, and I get the scent of Pacific Palisades and Santa Monica Boulevard and La Cienega and living high in the canyons. All of my training failed me. I had this guy pegged, and he was somebody from that industry in which I was not supposed to be a part. He was of Hollywood, of the entertainment industry. So I short-shrifted him in my mind. I think at the first I was trying to shake you down for $10,000 for a detox bed in Baltimore.
Which I gave you.
You gave me, right. I thought I put one over on the guy from Hollywood. In truth, what I found out through a series of subsequent conversations and essential conversations over the content of the material that I was trying to do at HBO, I found out that this was one of the most educated, sensitive, and socially and politically aware people I've ever met. To the extent that you may have ever seen anything on this on HBO that in the last some odd years that had any sense of the world, our place in it, and what's at stake politically and culturally for us as Americans and as citizens of the world. Richard has had something to do with it. If not at the initial inception, then at the point of preserving it and nurturing it and making sure it actually comes out and gets on television. And some of that stuff has been incredibly, just improbable. In my own experience, The Corner, Generation Kill, and of course The Wire, Richard's conversations with the brass at HBO, unbeknownst to me, by the time I heard about it, I had finally figured Richard out. But after seasons 3, when we were canceled, he helped get us uncanceled. After seasons 4, when we were canceled, he did it again. And I slowly came to realize that I had been the fool and that maybe I needed to go out and get a tan. Because, forgive me, Richard, I knew nothing of who you were, but ultimately what happened at HBO was that there was somebody who was really following Edward R. Murrow's arguments about what television could be, what high-end television could be if it just had the ambition and people had the will and people were willing to not accept anything less. And with the exception of PBS, that has been something unheard of in the entertainment industry. So I'm still ashamed to say I'm in the entertainment industry, but if I'm at least hanging with him, maybe not so much. Richard, this is well-deserved, and I just can't say more about how much I admire you.
Richard, I was not going to say anything about the tan. Thank you. Congratulations to all of you, and thank you, Skip, for including me in this joyous occasion. You may wonder why we are double-teaming Richard tonight, and I can only think that Skip was concerned that David Simon might not actually make it. So I'm here as the insurance policy to tell you about Richard Plebler, the Renaissance man. And I mean that quite literally. I think of Richard as the closest thing our culture has to Lorenzo de' Medici. He's a patron of the arts. He's a commissioner of some of the great cultural monuments of our era, and I mean that quite seriously. He's a student of statecraft, and he's very interested, if I might say so, in the art of living, and he lives extremely well. I want to tell you a little bit about each of those things. Now, I don't think that Richard green-lighted The Sopranos, but I do know that he kept it alive. And the reason I know that is there was a season that David Chase did not want to go on, and if you watch that season, it was when Tony Soprano was in the hospital with a gunshot wound and he wasn't necessarily going to make it. And Carmela's by his bedside, everyone's very concerned about him, and this nasty doctor comes in who high-handedly starts ordering everybody around, and he's like the epitome of the worst kind of emergency room egotist surgeon. Dr. Plebler, he was called on the show. Which was David Chase's revenge for Richard making him do, I think, 3 more seasons after he was ready to hand it in. He backed The Wire when it wasn't making money, when it wasn't getting ratings, and before it had any of the critical acclaim that it so richly deserved, but took a while to catch up with it. Now, we were big fans of The Wire at Slate, the magazine where I've worked. And at one point we became concerned, I think it was when the decision was being made about whether to continue with the last season, that it was going to get canceled because it wasn't getting the ratings and it wasn't doing that well. And we decided we were going to have a crusade, and our TV critic and everyone were going to start writing that HBO, don't cancel The Wire, don't cancel The Wire. So I called up Richard just to kind of warn him that we were going to start this public lobbying campaign to tell him what to do. And as I remember his reaction, he said, "What kind of idiot do you think I am? I'm not going to cancel The Wire." Now, I mentioned Richard's role as a patron of the arts. This is a kind of personal thing, too. Richard and his wonderful wife, Lisa, who isn't here tonight, are collectors and champions of a lot of artists who are friends of theirs. And if you are a writer of a book and you're lucky enough to know the Pleblers, you've got the best advocates, the first readers, the most enthusiastic supporters. They are publicists for their friends who write books, and they are genuine enthusiasts. And they have, at the beautiful house they live in New York, a kind of series of literary and political events. It's a kind of salon where you get the feeling that every night of the week there are interesting people coming and discussing interesting things and sharing. Yeah. Don't shatter my illusions, please. And there's good food and there's wine and it's very companionable. And if you're ever lucky enough to take in this scene, I'm sure you will share my first reaction to it, which is pure, unadulterated envy for the kind of life Richard lives. But they're not just patrons of the arts, they're in a very interesting way patrons of politics, too. Richard has a kind of fascination with politics, almost an obsession with politics. He loves foreign policy. He's actually on the Trilateral Commission, which you may have heard along with Skull and Bones and the Bilderberg Group and the Kennedy School of Government actually secretly runs the world. I've never got very much out of him about that. To know Richard is to know a lot about Chris Dodd. Richard was telling me very, very early in this campaign cycle that Chris Dodd should run for president, that he would run for president. It was another one of these, yeah, sure, well, let's see when it happens. But amazingly, Chris Dodd did run for president, and with, I think, some advice from Richard, he did the really improbable, which was to completely fail as a candidate, but really enhance his reputation. That was a dignified campaign. It was a great campaign. And Richard, I have to say, was absolutely right in everything he told me about Chris Dodd. So I want to end just with a couple of my favorite stories about Richard. I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, knowing that I was going to be talking about him here tonight. And he said he once asked Richard whether he himself, given his interest in politics, wanted to be president. And Richard's answer was, "My ambitions go way beyond that." So this raises the question, what ambition could go beyond being president of the United States? And the answer, of course, if you know Richard, is president of Israel. And this brings me to my other story, because Richard follows Israeli politics very closely, has a lot of advice for Israeli politicians, which they unfortunately don't take most of the time. And when important Israelis, cultural figures or political figures come through town, they're usually at some point having lunch or dinner with Richard. And Shimon Peres, as president of Israel, was going to be coming from New York. I don't know if you know the story I'm about to tell. I apologize in advance. His office said, well, would the Pleblers host a dinner for him? I think this was during UN week. And Richard's wife, Lisa, I think possibly having had the pleasure of listening to President Peres' monologue, said no. And so Richard then had to call his wife's father, get him to call Lisa, and say, when the president of Israel wants to have dinner at your house, you don't say no. And so Lisa said yes, and they planned the dinner, and Richard called up the president's office again and said, who would he like to have join him at this dinner? And I think, assuming that the answer would be some of the ambassadors from countries represented in the UN Security Council, or, Tom Friedman, top foreign policy columnist, and the answer was, he wants the woman from the sex show. Which is how Shimon Peres and Sarah Jessica Parker came to sit next to each other at dinner at Richard's house. But that's actually totally typical of what goes on around Richard. He's this kind of nexus between entertainment, between fine arts, between politics, and the world of ideas. We're not fact-checking any of these stories, by the way. But lastly, and I think this point is absolutely relevant tonight, I just want to highlight Richard's contributions to African American culture. And David talked about what he did for The Wire, and that's very much at the heart of it. But under Richard's leadership, HBO has been the network with PBS that has been most serious about representing African Americans and their history in a serious way. It has been distinguished in terms of hiring black talent and doing programs around African American themes that include not just The Wire, but When the Levees Broke, The Blacklist was a recent one, Unchained Memories, which some of you may have seen, and Bea, A Black Woman Speaks. And I think we're all looking forward to a documentary that I know Richard has bought, which is going to run sometime next year, which is a documentary Ed Norton made on the Obama campaign, which is going to run on 09. But beyond HBO, Richard has been a sponsor of the Du Bois Center and of The Root, which is an online African-American magazine that Skip and I have worked on this year. And when we were starting it, literally one of the first things we did was, let's call Richard. And of course, HBO stepped up to be a launch sponsor of The Root. So, in concluding, I'm proud to call Richard a friend, and it's a pleasure to be with him tonight when he receives this very well-deserved award.
There's so much to say about this man. This is the moment of the citation, and so I am pleased to speak to you of Richard Plebler. People are still talking about the symposium held at the Institute of Politics and co-sponsored by the Du Bois Institute last April, HBO's The Wire. You were dressed differently, David Simon, at that time. Called the best television show ever by any number of critics and loyal viewers, one of which is our own William Julius Wilson. The Wire was David Simon and Ed Burns' magnificent and grueling series about life on the gritty streets of Baltimore, and about so much more than that. And this show had a distinctive array of fully drawn African-American characters. Some were detectives and lieutenants and police commissioners. Some were ministers and politicians, but others were drug lords and junkies and children who broke our hearts. And all were complicated figures driven by conflicting impulses and philosophies, and none was uniformly admirable or detestable. Well, The Wire also represents the cultural and intellectual daring of Richard Plebler, the HBO co-president and one of its staunchest allies throughout its run, and a steadfast supporter not only of African American cultural institutions, but also of bringing African American culture into wider view. Currently, as co-president of HBO, and since arriving at the network in 1992 to helm corporations, Richard has been an unstoppable force for diversity within HBO and Time Warner specifically, and also in the film and television industry overall. He's intimately involved with the creative side as much as the innovative programming of HBO. Including The Wire is also, as was said, The Sopranos, the recent Iraq documentary, A Live Day Memories, and the groundbreaking original film, Lackawanna Blues. Richard has shown rare genius for finding and showcasing what Skip calls a talent of color. The outrageously talented multiracial cast of Lackawanna Blues, for instance, mirrored the outrageously talented multiracial behind-the-scenes crew, the director George C. Wolfe, executive producer Shelby Stone, and Richard himself. And this translated into a terrific one-man stage play and into a boisterous and touching film. So when Skip asked Henry McGee to cite an example of Richard's commitment to nurturing black culture, McGee was quick to list Richard's support for the Black Filmmaker Foundation, BFF Summit, as the most noteworthy among his many accomplishments. And the summit was the brainchild of BFF, the president and noted filmmaker Warrington Hudlin, who back in the mid-1990s asked Richard to co-sponsor a retreat for filmmakers of color, where they would speak freely about the challenges they faced. Well, Richard decided that he didn't want to co-sponsor. He wanted to solely sponsor this event. And so the network did that, and it has done this since 1996. And it's brought together not only fledgling directors, but also superstars like Spike Lee and Keenan Ivory Wayans, Melvin Van Peebles, Reggie Hudlin. All of these are regularly in attendance to talk shop, to cut deals, to carry on the continuing discussion of the industry's challenges to the people of color. And Richard's goal, I am proud to say, is to make the industry a little less challenging for African Americans, or to put it better, to create challenges for black filmmakers that have to do with the art of filmmaking rather than overcoming racial barriers. Now, Richard has served on many boards. He has so many affiliations, a range of interests and commitments. Some are the Phoenix House, New York Outward Bound, the Council of Foreign Relations, the Asia Society, the Trilateral Commission, FINCA, the American Friends of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and of course, our own beloved Du Bois Institute. They have benefited from his expansive mind and his generous spirit. He's also, I should add, on the advisory committee of Film Aid International, an organization which provides funding and materials to filmmakers from the developing world. And I think it's safe to say that Richard loves film and sees it as a means for growth and empowerment and connection and a way of making sense of and improving our world. Richard started out as a PR man, but you'll never hear him sing his own praises. His commitment and contributions to African American culture are formidable. From behind the scenes, he has nurtured any number of Black creative artists. He has made possible a number of creative works, both at home and abroad. It is my great pleasure to present Richard Plebler with the Du Bois Medal for his outstanding contributions to African American culture, the arts, and the life of the mind. Congratulations.
Thank you. Too many encomiums for one night. Thank you so much, Ellen. Those are very sweet words. I want to thank Jake and David, both of whom are dear friends, both of whom are preternatural talents, both of whom make an enormous contribution to our culture, and both of whom I am so proud to call dear friends. Thank you both so much for coming and for your sweet words. Now, you can make fun of the tan all you want. Let me tell you something. I have always felt more black than white, and I do what I can along the way. It's actually true. I do what I can. Now, first, I think that it is very important to be absolutely clear about the real reason HBO and I are being honored tonight. Namely, I, like so many people around the country, and indeed now also around the world, am an acolyte of Henry Louis Gates, Jr. Now, Skip is a modest man, and he doesn't like it when you say that he's a national treasure, but he is. And he doesn't like it when you say that he is a peerless scholar, but he is. And he doesn't even like it when you say that he is a famous sex symbol among academics everywhere around the world, but he is.
I like that.
But to me, he is simply a special friend and mentor who for over 15 years has provided me with wise counsel on so many aspects of my life, and for which I am ever grateful. There's a wonderful line by Goethe that in the presence of superiority, the only defense is love. Skip Gates is a superior man, and I, like so many of you, love him very much. So I am particularly appreciative on behalf of everyone at HBO to accept this acknowledgement from the Du Bois Institute for the range of work which we have so proudly produced over the years, whether tackling race, poverty, civil rights, or injustice. Tonight, I must tell you, I really do stand on the shoulders of so many of my extraordinary colleagues who have joined in our collective passion to assure that we shine a light on those issues too often forgotten or ignored. They include Spike Lee's 4 Little Girls, which chronicle the tragedy of the murders in Birmingham of 4 children by the Klan in 1963, or Spike's epic recounting of our nation's shameless failure to act after the tragedy of Hurricane Katrina, and our recent documentaries on rape in the Congo or our unconscionable behavior as a nation regarding those abuses perpetrated at Abu Ghraib, or the brilliant exploration of intractable poverty and privation examined so insightfully in David Simon's masterpiece, The Wire. We are proudest when, as a network, we amplify those challenges which confront us as a citizenry and which demand our focus, our attention, and our involvement. We do this, I think, not only because we have a responsibility to address those subjects through popular culture, but because we believe it is the best way to illuminate to a larger public our common humanity and our shared responsibility to each other. It's what King called our inescapable web of mutuality. It is a further treat for me to share this evening with such distinguished and extraordinary individuals as Tavis Smiley, whose wonderful show on PBS seeks to clarify and enlighten whatever issue he chooses to address. He does so always with wisdom and with compassion. I'm a huge fan. With my old friend Tammy Robinson, whose standards of excellence are manifest in the many programs which you have heard cited tonight that she helped bring to PBS over the past decade, an extraordinary body of work. And with Ingrid Saunders Jones from Coca-Cola, whose nobility and grace adds immeasurably to Coca-Cola's work, not only across the United States, but throughout the world. It is a pleasure to join with all of you tonight. And finally, I want to thank the Du Bois Institute for their remarkable work in contributing to African and African American scholarship. They have already created an inimitable legacy for generations to come. Now, Justice Marshall once famously remarked that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It is required of those of us who have the privilege of these jobs that we remain steadfast in the service of his belief. So I thank you all for your kind words tonight, for your recognition, and thank you all for being here and for joining me. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Thank you.
That was bad. That was bad. That's my students right there. They hit that out the park, Cornell. They hit that out. They can't do that at Princeton. Everybody to everybody.
I'm Marcelina Morgan, and it's a pleasure and honor to be here and to follow such wonderful singing, and I will be reading from the Sorrow Songs. Your country, how came it yours? Before the pilgrims landed, we were here. Here we have brought our three gifts and mingled them with yours, a gift of story and song, soft, stirring melody in an ill-harmonized and unmelodious land. The gift of sweat and brawn to beat back the wilderness, conquer the soil, and lay the foundations of this vast economic empire 200 years earlier than your weak hands could have done it. The third, a gift of the Spirit. Around us, the history of the land has centered for thrice 100 years. Out of the nation's heart, we have called all that was best to throttle and subdue all that was worst. Fire and blood, prayer and sacrifice have billowed over this people, and they have found peace only in the altars of the God of right. Nor has our gift of the Spirit been merely passive. Actively, we have woven ourselves with the very warp and woof of this nation. We fought their battles, shared their sorrow, mingled our blood with theirs, and generation after generation have pleaded with the headstrong, careless people to despise not justice, mercy, and truth, lest the nation be smitten with a curse. Our song, our toil, our cheer, and warning have been given to this nation in blood brotherhood. Are not these gifts worth the giving? Is not this work and striving? Would America have been America without the Negro people? Even so is the hope that sang in the songs of my father's well sung. If somewhere in this whirl and chaos of things there dwells eternal good, pitiful yet masterful, then anon is his good time. America shall rend the veil, and the prisoned shall go free. Free, free as the sunshine trickling down the morning into these high windows of mine. Free as yonder fresh young voices, welling up to me from the caverns of brick and mortar below, swelling with song, instinct with life, tremulous treble and darkening bass. My children, my little children, are singing to the sunshine, and thus they sing, let us cheer the weary traveler, cheer the weary traveler, let us cheer the weary traveler along the heavenly way. And the traveler gears himself and sets his face toward the morning and goes his way. Thank you.
Good evening. To Professor Gates, I would like to express my thanks for the invitation to participate in this year's Du Bois Medal Award ceremony. To the honorees, I extend my sincere congratulations. My name is Rudolph Byrd, and I come to bring a tribute to one who is honored here. Educator, public servant, corporate leader, philanthropist, and racewoman. These are the several descriptors that come to mind when one thinks of Ingrid Saunders Jones, who is beloved of many in this nation and around the world. She is the loving and dutiful daughter of Georgia Lyle Saunders and the late Homer Saunders, both of whom inculcated in her at an early age the importance of combining intelligence with imagination, discipline with compassion, high aspirations with pragmatism, and social justice with egalitarian values. Born in Detroit, Michigan, she attended Northwestern University High School and also that special college of the performing arts in her neighborhood called Motown, then under the direction of Berry Gordy, where her teachers were the Supremes, the Temptations, and the Four Tops. From the start, her sense of the world was shaped not only by the important values of family, but also by books and the music that defined an era. After graduating from Northwestern University High School, Ms. Jones majored in education at Michigan State University, where she earned her baccalaureate, and shortly thereafter her Master of Arts at Eastern Michigan University. She was first an educator, though in many ways she continues to function in this vital role. Ms. Jones began her teaching career in the public schools of Detroit and subsequently Atlanta, Georgia. Whether in the classroom or as executive director of the Wayne County Child Care Coordinating Council, she was a dedicated teacher, and for this she is admired and remembered by her students as well as her teachers. One example among many will serve. In September of this year, I attended an awards ceremony where Ms. Jones was honored by the Page Foundation for her national contributions to higher education, and her guest of honor was Mr. James Shirley, her sixth grade teacher from Thurkel Elementary School. I recall this event because it is revealing of Ms. Jones's abiding commitment to excellence in higher education, and equally as important, it is revealing of her belief in the importance of continuity in remembering and honoring those who have functioned as teachers, mentors, and guides in her own life. And it also must be said on this occasion, and among so many who have devoted their lives to higher education, that Ms. Jones has served as a teacher, mentor, and guide to countless numbers throughout her rich and productive life. Even as an officer in one of the world's leading corporations, she mentors undergraduates at Emory University, Spelman College, and Morehouse College. The competition to become a protege of Ms. Jones is fierce, as they say. For everybody knows that along with the privilege of accompanying Ms. Jones on her company plane to opening night events in some of the world's capitals, there is also the great pleasure of the company of a cosmopolite and the promise of her full and compassionate attention. In addition to being a teacher, Ms. Jones is also a public servant. This aspect of her life assumed a special significance when she was awarded a fellowship by the Atlanta's Fellows Program. Modeled after the White House Fellows Program, through the Atlanta Fellows Program, Ms. Jones developed further her commitment to public service for the public good, and in the process acquired knowledge of the operations of city government and its legislative processes. During the fellowship and in the years afterwards, she was executive assistant to the Honorable Maynard H. Jackson, then mayor of Atlanta. She was also legislative analyst to Carl Ware, then president of the Atlanta City Council, and sometime later her mentor and colleague at the Coca-Cola Company. Put another way, Ms. Jones was an important figure in the paradigmatic shift in political and economic power that took place in what W.E.B. Du Bois called the City of 100 Hills in the early 1980s. It was during this vibrant period in Atlanta that I had the great pleasure of meeting Ms. Jones. From my small desk in the office of the mayor, I watched her with both admiration and wonder as she gave direction to the powerful. As an aide to the powerful, and in particular to powerful men, she was never intimidated, never cowed, never afraid, as they say, to speak truth to power. She developed the art of delivering the difficult message with integrity and with a knowledge of the expanding constellation of interests. In other words, she learned how to channel resources to those who were most deserving of them, and to tell those who overreached to go to hell and have them look forward to the journey. Ms. Jones has combined her considerable skills as an educator and public servant with the attending knowledge of politics, psychology, economics, and diplomacy in her present position at the Coca-Cola Company. She is Senior Vice President for Global Community Connections and Chairperson of the Coca-Cola Foundation for the Coca-Cola Company. In these vital positions, Ms. Jones provides leadership in the company's efforts to make a unique and sustainable difference everywhere the company does business, one community at a time. Under her leadership, the Coca-Cola Foundation has contributed more than $256 million to education and other community initiatives. She has extended the reach of the Coca-Cola Company in the important domain of education through corporate sponsorships, which include such events, cultural institutions, and educational programs as the Essence Music Festival, the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater, Jazz at Lincoln Center, the National Black Arts Festival, and Henry Louis Gates's African American Lives. Her work as an exemplary corporate citizen extends to her service on several national boards, including the boards of Clark Atlanta University, the Carter Center of Emory University, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, the Coca-Cola Scholars Foundation, and the Coca-Cola Africa Foundation. Her many contributions to the civic, educational, and cultural life of the nation have not gone unrecognized. She has been honored by such organizations as the National Urban League, the NAACP, the NAACP Legal and Education Fund, and the American Jewish Committee. She holds honorary degrees from her alma mater, Michigan State University, and Spelman College. Recently, Ms. Jones was honored by her peers in the Executive Leadership Council. Such a recognition from such a body comes only to a few. As she goes about her urgent and transformational work in her leadership position at the Coca-Cola Company, Ms. Jones does so in the spirit and tradition of the race women who have come before her. Of course, as a member of Delta Theta sorority, she brings a particular perspective to race work and social uplift. Like Nanny Burroughs and the other race women, Professor Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham has examined with such insight in her landmark history, Righteous Discontent. Ms. Jones has done her share of what Burroughs termed foundation laying and setting in motion forces that have advanced the race and improved the condition of black women. For in Ms. Jones's life and work, we see again the struggle for self-definition that is also the historic struggle of African American women, to paraphrase Professor Higginbotham, in the making of black communities and in the remaking of America. Unlike the goddess at Atlanta, who functions as a morality tale in W.E.B. Du Bois's Of the Wings of Atalanta, this race woman from Detroit was never seduced by 3 apples of gold. In order to capture one last dimension of Ms. Jones's life and work, I turn to the scholarship of the Reverend Professor Peter Gomes. In The Good Life, Truths That Last in Times of Need, Professor Gomes makes this observation about the nature of love. Love is not something we believe, have, keep, or give. It is something we do. And in its doing, love shows forth works. Love is also something that Ms. Jones does, and this commitment to do love's work is reflected in her life's work, in all the parts of her life, and in all that she does for the nation and for humankind. Ladies and gentlemen, with great respect and with great love, I present to you Ingrid Saunders Jones.
What a beautiful tribute to a beautiful woman. Even with the shape of our economy changing, it seems, daily, and with global American companies certainly not a rarity in the world's commercial landscape, few, if any, American products hold the iconic power of a simple bottle of Coca-Cola. The logo is instantly recognizable in any language. Decades of jingles and slogans are seared into our memories. But with universal presence comes responsibility. And for the past several years, no one has been more responsible for the good that can be accomplished by a company with global reach than has Ingrid Saunders Jones. As Senior Vice President of Global Community Connections for the Coca-Cola Company and Chair of the Coca-Cola Foundation, Ingrid Saunders Jones has led the corporate world in building sustainable communities, both abroad and at home. Whether it is partnering with the World Wildlife Fund and the U.S. Agency of International Development to foster and conserve Africa, for conservation in Africa, or it's seeing scholarship programs for U.S. high school students in our struggling cities, Ingrid Saunders Jones brings to her executive roles a passion and a sense of justice that are so often, we are told, lacking in the corporate world. Her philanthropic philosophy is straightforward. She was interviewed in Ebony, and she stated, and I quote her, "It is very important for successful companies and successful individuals to give back to the community. It goes back to the quality of life. We wouldn't be where we are as a company, and I wouldn't be where I am as an individual were it not for the community." Well, Ingrid Saunders Jones' interests in serving the community are vast and truly global, yet she has a particular energy as a board member for organizations deeply committed to improving the lives and opportunities and the culture of African Americans. And so she does this through the Coca-Cola Africa Foundation, the Coca-Cola Scholars Foundation, the HBCU Clark Atlanta University, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, the Desmond Tutu Peace Foundation, and the Apollo Theater. She was instrumental in Coca-Cola's sponsorship of the Essence Music Festival in New Orleans, and she's contributed significantly to rebuilding efforts in that city after Hurricane Katrina. For her good work, she has received many awards. From Essence Magazine, she received an award from the National Urban League, Morehouse College, and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, to name but a few. Ingrid Saunders Jones' emphasis on education and public works comes, I'd imagine, from her training as a teacher and her years behind the scenes of Detroit's and Atlanta's city government. I think she brings a sensitivity to public concerns. She has a belief in corporate power, but that power being used with tremendous effectiveness and grace. Ingrid Jones's deep commitment of both Coca-Cola's resources and her own to the city of Atlanta provides a model of how our own success can be used for the good of others. She is an exemplar of community service. Just to name a few, she has given to the arts and humanities and education of Atlanta when the city hosted the 1996 Summer Olympics. She's given to the Beltline Project, an urban redevelopment project that will provide trails for running, walking, and biking in Atlanta. She has given to the Pemberton Place, a 20-acre space in downtown Atlanta, which houses the Georgia Aquarium, the World of Coca-Cola, an interactive museum and educational facility, and 5 acres of urban green space. She has mentored students at Morehouse and at Spelman, just so many numerous wonderful exemplar of service. Rudolph Byrd has described her on another occasion as a modern Ida B. Wells, and I think this is a glorious description. Wells was a radical journalist. She stood in the forefront of the turn-of-the-century movement against lynching, and also to fight for African Americans' rights and civil rights. Wells spoke boldly, and as we just heard from Rudolph Byrd, Ingrid Saunders Jones also speaks truth to power. She is, in all ways, what has been described as a race woman through and through. Her commitment to black education and black culture is in her bones, and she uses her position high in the corporate arena to effect positive change in the black world. She provides us with a remarkable example of corporate responsibility, of corporate citizenship, and for her, the bottom line is about enriching people's lives. It is my great privilege to present Ingrid Saunders Jones with a Du Bois Medal for her contributions to the arts, to culture, and to the life of the mind.
Good evening to all of you. The honor associated with this award to this evening comes from many places. First and foremost, my friend of more than 25 years, Rudolph Byrd. I appreciate your kind and heartfelt words. And I also thank you for not telling everything you know, because you do know a lot. You know, today is a very tall cotton day, as the old folks would say. W.E.B. Du Bois, Skip Gates, Harvard University, John F. Kennedy Center, Tammy Robinson, Richard Plebler, and Tavis Smiley. I am honored to be in your presence as honorees and in the presence of those who present you. You know, my world with W.E.B. Du Bois started when I was very little because I had an aunt, the late Ruth Graham, who was a graduate student at Atlanta University, and she worked for W.E.B. Du Bois. And as I grew older, I came to understand the significance of the conversations between my aunt and my parents as they referenced him with such reverence. And so when I finally saw his desk in the library, the Woodruff Library of the Atlanta University Center, it really held a special place in my heart and in my head, and I wondered if my aunt had touched it, or maybe the books or particulars that were shown with it. But I also want to share with you that I once asked her, when I got old enough to understand the significance, you know, what it is they talked about. And she said, "We only spoke to him when he spoke to us." I thank my friend Skip Gates so much for considering me worthy of the Du Bois Institute Medal. Skip has been a hero of mine for a long, long time, long before our paths ever crossed. And Tammy Robinson, I'll never forget our work on African American lives and your dedication to public broadcasting. Without question, Tammy has influenced, as you have heard, some of the most important national program in the history of public television. And Richard, I've just met you this evening, but I know your work. And indeed, you are a media mogul, a tan media mogul. And what you do is you hold in your hands the ability to influence our culture and many generations, and you do it well. So hold it carefully and continue your work, and we thank you. And last but certainly not least, Tavis Smiley, my friend. You epitomize what it is to be an effective leader with a strong sense of purpose, unwavering conviction, and the willingness to tell your truth all the time. We thank you, Tavis, not only for your leadership as a journalist and a community activist, but for the way you have lifted up young people through your Tavis Smiley Youth Foundation, and we're proud to be a supporter of your work. I am flattered and humbled to be in your presence all. And what we all know is this: by any measure, W.E.B. Du Bois stands as a giant, a visionary, a man capable of dreaming dreams for his people and for all people, dreams bigger even than some of us could ever dream for ourselves. Even so, one can only imagine what Dr. Du Bois would make of this extraordinary moment in our American history. Skip Gates, you have held on to and you hold up those visionary aspirations and dreams of Dr. Du Bois. And we thank you because you are one of America's great public intellectuals. You help to make our culture, our history, and our literature accessible to a broad audience. More importantly, you understand that history is a living, breathing being, and you instinctively know how to share history in a way that average people can relate to it. And that is why the Du Bois Institute is so very important as a repository and a source of continued enlightenment, a place for the life of the mind. Skip Gates, the Coca-Cola Company, has been proud to support your groundbreaking African American Lives 1 and 2 and Oprah's Roots, all beautifully produced by 13 WNET, New York. And I'd like to introduce two of my colleagues who have worked with me on this work. Lynn Hinkle is my executive assistant who is here this evening. And I want you all to know Helen Smith Price. Ms. Price is an assistant vice president at the Coca-Cola Company and the executive director of the Coca-Cola Foundation. And this is my posse. There are others who work with us and for me, but this is my posse. And we have a yin and a yang, if you will, a G and a ha, and that's how we get things done. And we come to celebrate these extraordinary programs which have allowed African Americans and all Americans embrace our long-lost ancestors across the miles and through the years, and in doing so, places their stories within the common narrative. Thank you for your work, Skip Gates. And what I know is that the best is yet to come. And so in closing, I do two things. I go back to the beginning and thank you for this honor and congratulate my fellow honorees. And then I'll close by quoting another historian and scholar, one of my favorites, John Henrik Clarke, who said that history is a clock that people use to tell their time of day. It tells them who they are and what they are. It helps them find themselves on the map of human geography. Those of us who live our lives well, I think, understand it's what we do today that writes the history of tomorrow. Our ancestors wrote a very rich history for us. We are writing a history for those to come. Let us continue to do it well, and I thank you again for this honor.
Good evening. I'm Glenda Carpio. I teach in the African American Studies Department in English, and I will be reading from the very beginning of Chapter 6 of Souls of Black Folk, of the Training of Black Men, parts of which you've already heard from Professor Gates and from Professor Bill Wilson. One of the things that I think, if I can telepath Du Bois into the now, is that this chapter might be called The Training of Black Men and Women. From the shimmering swirl of waters where many, many thoughts ago the slave ship first saw the square tower of Jamestown, have flowed down to our day three streams of thinking, one swollen from the larger world here and overseas, saying the multiplying of human wants in culture lands calls for the worldwide cooperation of men in satisfying them. Hence arises a new human unity, pulling the ends of earth nearer, and all men, black, yellow, and white. The larger humanity strives to feel in this contact of living nations and sleeping hordes a thrill of new life in the world, crying, if the contact of life and sleep be death, shame on such life. To be sure, behind this thought lurks the afterthought of force and dominion, the making of brown men to delve when the temptation of beads and red calico cloys. The second thought streaming from the death ship in the curving river is the thought of the older South, the sincere and passionate belief that somewhere between men and cattle, God created a tertium quid called it a Negro, a clownish, simple creature, at times even lovable within its limitations, but straightly foreordained to walk within the veil. To be sure, behind the thought lurks the afterthought. Some of them, with favoring chance, might become men, but in sheer self-defense, we dared not let them. And we build about them walls so high and hang between them and the light a veil so thick that they shall not even think of breaking through. And last of all, there trickles down that third and darker thought, the thought of the things themselves, the confused, half-conscious mutter of men who are black and whitened, crying, liberty, freedom, opportunity, vouchsafe to us, O boastful world, the chance of living men. To be sure, behind the thought lurks the afterthought. Suppose, after all, the world is right, and we are less than men. Suppose this bad impulse within us is all wrong, some mock mirage from the untrue. So here we stand among the thoughts of human unity, even through conquest and slavery, the inferiority of black men, even if forced by fraud, a shriek in the night for freedom of men who themselves are not yet sure of their right to demand it. This is the tangle of thought and afterthought, wherein we are called to solve the problem of the training of men for life.
Let me first say it's always a blessing to return to Cambridge. There's no doubt about that. Oh, yes, always a blessing. All the wonderful people, I want to salute the two captains, the two grand leaders, my leaders, even from Jersey. My dear sister Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham. I tell you. And my dear brother Skip Gates himself, the two. Just give these two a hand. They're going to have such distinguished recipients. Someone who I have had such profound respect for so many years, and to be able to now see her in the flesh. Yes, what a blessing, Tammy Robinson. Oh, yes, indeed, 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 indeed. Whoa. And my dear brother Richard Plebler, we go back 16 years. In fact, when he was first there, he invited me to speak. I was the first person he invited to speak when he was there as vice president. And for 16 wonderful years, I've just been a close and distant friend and brother. And it is for real when he talks about his profound commitment, not just to black people, but to his attempt to be a force for good. And it's always a blessing to see you, my brother. And my dear sister Ingrid Saunders Jones. It's so difficult to preserve your integrity in corporate space these days. But you're looking at somebody who exemplifies a courage and a commitment and a conviction in that context. And of course, the last time I saw you, we were dancing to Frankie Beverly on the dance floor in New Orleans, just boogieing on down. And she can move too, but it's her intelligence and her imagination. But of course, I've come, and it's getting late. I won't go on too long, but Tavis Smiley. Tavis Smiley. I met him 22 years ago. He was already a young brother on fire.
from Kokomo, Indiana. That's not the cutting edge of urban space, cosmopolitan sensibility. It was there in Mark Ridley Thomas's office, and we talked, and I could see in him what I want each and every one of you to do when you look right now at in the eyes of the great W.E.B. Du Bois in that medal. Just look at his eyes. And his eyes, the eyes are the windows of the soul. And burning deep in that soul is a fundamental commitment to unarmed truth and unconditional love. And that commitment has been shaped and molded by a people in the midst of a white supremacist civilization, hating them and taught to hate themselves, but still a commitment to unconditional love, and lies being told about them, white supremacist lies, male supremacist lies, but in the face of it, a commitment to unarmed truth. That's what I love about Du Bois, whether you agree or disagree with that brother. But he's for real in his understanding that the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. That's what I love about Tavis Smiley. From the very beginning, it was clear that here was one of those few that was willing to muster the courage to engage in a quest for truth that was connected to the voices of those who were suffering no matter what color. This brother grew up with 10 brothers and sisters and mother and father in a trailer with 2 rooms in Kokomo. And look at him now. And I'm not just talking about Harvard. I'm talking about television. I'm talking about radio. I'm talking about the Covenant book, #1. No Today Show, no Oprah, still #1. Covenant with Action, #7. Mention the young precious people. The Tavis Smiley Youth Foundation. Tavis Smiley decided then, and we made a pact. He's never had an older brother. I've never had a younger brother. So we made a pact. Every day, every week, every month, every year, we're going to keep each other accountable and be faithful unto death in the quest for unarmed truth and unconditional love. So when people talk about love, like John Coltrane's Love Supreme, or Toni Morrison's Be Lover, Stevie Wonder's songs in the key of life, love and the need of love, he understood, I understood, in part because Du Bois understood, when you look closely at him, that justice is in part what love looks like in public. That when you really love folk, you can't stand the fact they're being treated unfairly. You loathe the fact they're being treated unjustly. You do what you have to do. Love is just not some abstract conception. It's a fire in your soul to be a force for good. And Tavis and I wrestle with this year in and year out in whatever context, be it Harvard or be it Mike's basement after dark, be it in the church or be it in the hurry back lounge. I see Brother Rivers understand what I'm talking about. He and I used to hang out in that lounge, didn't we, brother? And I should mention the godfather of us all, my dear brother, who loved me enough and taught me that the quest for truth had something to do with taking a risk and sacrificing, and what I've tried to bequeath to Tavis, and Tavis gives it back to me. I'm talking about our dear brother Martin Kilson. You see that brother sitting on the left? Give him a hand. Give this brother a hand. He's the godfather of all of us. He's the godfather of all of us right there. Stand on up, though, brother. First black professor tenured at Harvard University, 1968. No, we're part of a tradition. Part of a tradition. As I recall, he could be wearing the same hat that he was then, but that's all right. We still love him because he sees what is inside of him is inside of Du Bois.
Black folk have no monopoly on it, but when in fact you're cutting against a grain that's so thick, that's what we're talking about. That's what I love about this brother. That's why I'll go anywhere to talk about him, because in talking about him, we end up not just talking about individuals, you're talking about traditions of every people, in every culture, in every civilization that really wants to take Paideia on. I'm glad you all have been invoking the 6th chapter of the Souls of Black Folk. Because you remember how that begins, Omar Khayyam, with the poetry, the soul that flies, and then the Negro spiritual called March On, echoed in the Southern Road in 1932 of Sterling Brown, black men still marching in the Rocky Road section. And yes, we're going to not add the sisters. The sisters are always already there. We're just acknowledging what's already there. I'm with you, my sister. This brother is part of that tradition. And then another Harvard graduate of 1910, T.S. Eliot used to say, tradition is not something you gain by means of osmosis. If you want it, you have to sacrifice for it. You have to fight for it. You have to be willing to take a risk for it. You gain access to it by means of labor. And that's what Paideia is. When you look at Tavis Smiley's questioning why he's the finest talk host, and we do love Charlie Rose, but when he recycles the establishmentarian figures, he's got to broaden out. But we love our brother. But with Tavis Smiley, you see, it's the deepening, not just in the name of some cheap construct called diversity put forward by some bureaucrat 35 years ago in order to keep Negroes in control. But truth, unarmed truth, that's what black folk, struggling folk has always been concerned about. That's what Tavis Smiley is about. When you see the conversations with James Taylor, this is not no chit-chat between a white brother and a black brother trying to reconcile without talk about justice. They have a common quest for truth. That's why they respect each other and they love each other. You see. And that's what we need in this age of Obama. See, the age of Reagan's over. The era of conservatism's over. Uncritical commitment to dogmas like free market, that's over. We got catastrophe now. But Tavis Smiley comes out of a blues people, and the blues ain't nothing but an autobiographical chronicle of a personal catastrophe expressed lyrically. And endured with grace and dignity. He's a blues man on the radio. He's a blues man on television. He's a blues man on the New York Times bestseller list. Take a look at that brother. From the sorrow songs, he didn't like the blues as a genre. He had Victorian sensibilities.
That's true.
But he loved the spirituals, and everybody knows that the spirituals are blues-inflicted Christian songs. There's a tragic dimension and a comic aspect to it. So maybe you don't like Ma Rainey because she's associated with too much hurry-back lounge activity. But don't think that Mahalia Jackson's not going to be influenced by Ma Rainey. When she sings the gospels and the spirituals, that blue note is going to still be there, shattering that superficial harmony and making dissonant itself a way of life. That's what Tavis Smiley represents. That's, in fact, why I love the word national treasure. All four of y'all national treasure. No doubt about that. But when I look at this brother still under 45, I have nothing against chronologically challenged brothers and sisters now. It's Tavis's word. But under 45, it's hard these days to build on a blues tradition that's still committed to Paideia, that formation of attention that shifts from the frivolous to the serious, and that cultivation of mastery of craft. It tries to get all of us to wrestle with reality and history and memory and mortality, and then the maturation of soul, to be decent and compassionate, because in the end, Tavis understands this, and you see it in his work. All the achievements and accomplishments, and this is where he's a Christian like myself, where the cross means something. No matter how high he aspires to, It's still sounding brass and tinkling cymbal if it doesn't have the love in it, if it doesn't have the compassion in it, if it doesn't have the giving element in it to help somebody else as they make their way. So I present to you all this evening my dear brother of 26 years, and we're all going to be faithful unto death, though, brother. When they put both of us in the grave, we want to be so used up that every piece of who we are and our minds and hearts and souls would have been pushed to the limit. We can't do anything else in our quest for unarmed truth and unconditional love. That's the kind of tradition that we want to be a part of. That's the kind of community that produced us. That's the kind of heritage that constitutes wind at our back. And even as we smile, we know it's not just a laughing matter, because much is at stake. Du Bois always understood when you talk about Negroes in America, the best of Negroes is the best of American democracy. And the best of American democracy is the best of the human spirit has to offer for much of the world, even though we've got to listen to what's going on in Asia and Latin America and Africa. You see. So this is no small matter. When you give a medal out like this, this has gravitas. It does. It's not just because Harvard is Harvard. Harvard was blessed to have a brother like W.E.B. Du Bois to come through, and Martin Kielsen to come through, and Bunch to come through, and so many other Negroes stumble through. And they used to say Harvard has ruined more Negroes than bad whiskey. So we're not talking about every one of them. But the ones who held up this legacy goes directly to what Tavis Smiley represents, who was admitted to Harvard Law, but had other things to do. My dear brother Tavis, love you so much, my brother. Respect you so much. And here we are from Kokomo to Harvard, but still on our way, marching on. Ain't gonna let nobody turn us around.
Cornell. Oh, thank you, Cornell. Give it up for Cornell West, ladies and gentlemen. Please, one more to Cornell. I miss Cornell West every day of my life. You know, I tell you something funny. Evelyn and I were dividing up, you know, who was going to present the medals, and we knew that for whoever followed Tavis was going to sound like, whoever followed Cornell presenting the Tavis was going to sound like you had oatmeal coming out your mouth. So I lost. That's all, folks. We've been talking a lot lately, or a lot more, even among those of us who talk about these things for a living, about the meaning of America, the meaning of we the people as the guiding principle of this great country, and of a more perfect union described by President-elect Barack Obama. Barack Hussein Obama's election has encouraged us all to reevaluate what we know, or indeed what we think we know about this country, and really to understand American history as progressive, a term I use not to imply a certain brand of politics, but rather the forward motion of the current generated by the past. No one talks more, no one talks better about these issues than does Tavis Smiley. Radio and television talk show host, author, publisher, activist, cultural impresario. Tavis Smiley brings a unique voice and a unique mandate to multiple arms of the American media. His interviews with newsmakers in politics, entertainment, activism, the arts, and ordinary life are the meat of his journalistic enterprise. But besides that is his belief that his position in and his access to various media can be used to effect genuine change within the African American community and in the larger American community as well. His New York Times bestseller, Covenant with America, for example, details the steps people can take to make their own lives better. His chief lesson is self-empowerment. But he also knows that people need a push, and he realizes his good fortune in having the platform and the pulpit to provide that push. As the journalist Amy Alexander wrote 2 years ago, Tavis always uses his power for good. A path-breaking media personality and journalist, Tavis learned about the power of speech, as Cornell said, growing up in Kokomo. Kokomo, Indiana, where the black church and the recordings of Dr. King taught him the words that could move people to tears, the words that could move people to laughter, the words that could move people to action. After graduating from Indiana University, Tavis cut his political teeth as an aide to LA Mayor Tom Bradley, and from there his media rise has been both meteoric and well documented. Recently featured in a profile in The New Yorker, Tavis represents and even more so understands the diversity of the American audience. I want to address briefly the Traveling Multimedia Museum exhibition that Tavis has so brilliantly founded. It's called America I Am, the African American Imprint. And this exhibition brings together documents, artifacts, and memorabilia of the African American contributions to American culture. I was honored when Tavis invited me, along with my dear brother Cornell West, to become an advisor to this exhibition. So I saw firsthand for the first time what Tavis Smiley looks like in motion, bringing his considerable eloquence and intelligence and charisma, bringing these all three to bear on a production different in scope than any that has ever been attempted before. America I Am, ladies and gentlemen, is unique because it showcases the materials of African American history in a way that no one private museum collection can do, where access is necessarily limited by location. America I Am will bring our history to people all around this country. Touring the country for 4 years, it has the potential to reach hundreds of thousands, indeed millions of Americans, and to educate them about the pivotal role that African Americans have played from the very foundations of this country right up to the present. It's not unlike Tavis's own programming on radio, TV, and the internet, if you think about it, where his multifaceted presence reaches millions of Americans, providing them with the education and information they can use to become better citizens. America I Am begins its inaugural run in about a month, on January 15th, at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. Tavis likes this location for Philadelphia's central role in the birth of this nation, of its ideals of freedom and liberty and justice for all. I like it for those reasons too, but for another simple fact as well. It was at the National Constitution Center that then candidate Barack Obama gave his immortal address on race in this nation and spoke so movingly and so convincingly about what it will take for us to build a more perfect union. This is work that Tavis Smiley engages in every day in countless ways. As I said to the New York Times for an article they were doing about the launching of this exhibition, Tavis Smiley is our closest equivalent to the journalistic face of W.E.B. Du Bois himself, Cornell West being the other half of that Janus face, Dr. Du Bois's sublime scholarship. For his contributions to the arts, to culture, and to the life of the mind, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure and my privilege to present the Du Bois Medal to Tavis Smiley this afternoon.
so much. Those words were so powerful. Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hast thou not known, hast thou not heard, that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is he weary. There is no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might, he increaseth their strength. Even the youth shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. And so tonight, I want to start by thanking the Creator for the strength to run, even at times when we are weary, and to continue to walk, even when we are faint. I apologize for the emotion, and I thought I could beat this back. But it is hard to describe what happens when your hero becomes your best friend. When the person who has immeasurably impacted your life introduces you in a forum like this. And so, Doc, I thank you. I love you, and there ain't nothing you will ever be able to do about that. Nothing at all. I thank you. I don't have the time to tell you all of the wisdom, the love, the support, the encouragement that I have learned from him and gathered from him. I am jealous of people like David Kim and others who had the chance to sit in the classroom with Dr. West. But every day that I talk to him, and that's pretty much every day, it's like being in class. I am a student, I am a sponge, and everything about his aesthetic, about his intellect, about his humanity, I revel in. And I thank you, Dr. West, for being here. You are the big brother that I've never had, and I can't imagine a day in life without you being a part of mine, without you being around. Professor Gates said earlier that they don't have this kind of singing at Princeton. I think you're right about that. I've been there a few times. I've been there a few times. I've never heard anything like this. But I would also hasten to add, Professor Gates, with all due respect, that the biggest mistake Harvard ever made was letting Dr. West get away. I agree. To Professor Gates and to Professor Higginbotham, thank you. I don't know what, at this age, I have done to have warranted, to have achieved this distinction, but far be it from me to question your fine judgment. So I want to thank you. I don't know what I have done seriously to have been blessed in my life to orbit this space where you can call personal friends Cornel West and Skip Gates. I never, ever imagined as a kid growing up in the cornfields of Indiana, reading and studying their work in college, that I would ever get to know, spend time, hang out with either one of them. But the blessing of being able to call them friends is more than I ever thought or dreamed that my life could become. Somebody once asked, and I was in a conversation the other day where this subject matter came up, some of us in this room are blessed to know what I'm talking about now when I say that sometimes your life exceeds your dreams. It's a rare thing. It's a rare thing to be so blessed in your life that your life actually exceeds your dreams. So the question that some of us, if we are fortunate, get a chance to wrestle with, the question we get a chance to marinate on is, what do you do, in fact, when your life exceeds your dreams? This night, for me tonight, means that I have officially arrived at that point. That my life has now exceeded my dreams, and at some point tonight when I get to bed, if I can sleep, Skip, I'm going to have to dream some bigger dreams. And I want to thank you for making this evening possible for me. To Ingrid Saunders Jones, when I saw the list of persons I was to be honored with, this woman has supported the work of my foundation more than any other person in the country, working with young people every year by the hundreds across this country. No one has supported that work that I continue to do more than Ingrid Saunders Jones. And so to be on the stage with Ingrid just completely humbled me. Ingrid, I love you, and I thank you for the work that you have done, not just for us, but so many others in this country and around the world. I thank you, and I'm honored to be on the stage with you tonight. To Tammy, we met once or twice briefly, but it is never, ever lost on me the blessing that I have to be on public television, to be on public radio. And I am always humbled by those who I know have paved the way for me to do what I do. To be the first African American to have his own talk show 5 nights a week on public television, and all of our taxpayer dollars have gone to pay for that opportunity for all the years that PBS has been around, to be the first black person to have his own radio show on PRI and NPR, but all of our taxpayer dollars go to support that, has been humbling for me. But I know that there are persons who made it possible for me to be on the air every night and every day on radio and television. And Ms. Robinson, I thank you for laying the groundwork for making that happen for me. To Mr. Plebler, who I just met for the first time tonight, I wanted to take the opportunity when I met him to thank him, and I did, for the programming that he has done consistently that allows us to see the complexity of black humanity, the layers of black humanity, to revel in that, to celebrate that, when you don't have to do that, when you're cutting against the grain to make it happen. It means something to celebrate that. And while it should not matter that he happens not to be an African American, it is significant for me because it points up the distinction that Dr. West and I have discussed so many times about what it means for people outside of our community to be caught up with this notion of color blindness, which is nonsensical to me and to West. But some people are caught up with this notion of color blindness rather than being, as Mr. Plebler is, love struck. It's two very different things. Two very different things. Colorblind and love struck. And I want to thank you for being love struck with our people and with our stories and for giving us a chance to see ourselves and the complexity of who we are. Lastly, I certainly want to thank, and again, talk about how fortuitous this is. I shared the stage with Ms. Robinson tonight, and little did I know that the president of PBS would be here to honor her. And so what a delight it is for me to see my president on the front row tonight, who supports me in everything that we do on PBS and stays out of my way. Lets me do what I do. But she's the person last year when we were the first person ever, the first network ever to put in prime time 2 presidential debates where the candidates from both parties had a chance to address people of color and the issues that matter to them. PBS, the first network to ever do that. Paula Kerger made that happen, and I thank you for giving me the chance to do that. To Raymond and to Kim, who are 2 of my staff members who are with me, who make my life just infinitely easier to live and to navigate. I love you both, and I thank you. And on behalf of all the persons back at the Smiley Group, we appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. So Skip, thank you. Thank you for making this happen. I know it's late. Thank all of you for coming and enduring this program and and celebrating and sharing in this evening that's been so special, I know, for all of us. Let me close with the words of Dr. King, the person who Doc and I go back and forth about all the time. Speaking of being faithful unto death, 40 years ago this year, as you know, we lost the person who I regard as the greatest American we've ever produced, Dr. King. Dr. King used to say all the time, cowardice ask, is it safe? Expediency ask, is it politic? Vanity ask, is it popular? But conscience ask, is it right? And every now and then, Professor Kilson, we got to take positions that are neither comfortable, safe, politic, or convenient, but we do it because our conscience tells us that it's right. What we're celebrating tonight is the fact that we attempt, I think, every day to do what our conscience tells us is right, and I know you share in that as well. Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. No, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on talking all the way up to freedom. Oh, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. No. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on and talking all the way up to freedom land. Oh, now let me tell you about a man named Moses and his battle with the Pharaoh. See, after hundreds of years of captivity, said it was time to let his people go. So he led God's people out of Egypt land, about as far as the Red Sea. And then he forged on ahead, as he said, not even an ocean can stop me. And I ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, no. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on and talking all the way up to freedom land. Oh, see, the struggle for freedom still alive today, and it's a battle that we must win. And the only way we'll get where we need to go is by remembering where we've been. 'Cause it was those who gave and sacrificed and fought for so many years. By holding on to hope, saying yes we can, I know change is finally here. And I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, no. Ain't gonna let nobody. I'm gonna keep on and talking all the way up to freedom land. And I ain't gonna let nobody, no. No matter how hard they try, ain't gonna let nobody. I'm gonna keep on and talking, fighting, praying, hoping, singing, just marching up to freedom land.
Oh, that's bad. That boy is bad. That boy can sing. Give it up. Give it up for that kid.
Cornell, he's some kind of octoroon or something, boy. That boy.
Oh, man. Woo. Thank you, Lord. It's hard to imagine we got anything to follow that. But good evening, everybody. Thank you and congratulations to our medalists who have graced us with their service, contributions, and achievements, and by being here on the stage this evening. It is my pleasure to read a brief entry from the opening chapter of Souls of Our Spiritual Strivings. And like Sister Glenda and Brother Korn, please understand that the sisters are in here, though the brother was writing at the time in a male voice. Okay, my name is Lawrence Bobo, and I'm a member of the faculty here in Afro-Am. Between me and the other world, there is ever an unasked question. Unasked by some through feelings of delicacy, by others through the difficulty of rightly framing it. All nevertheless flutter around it. They approach me in a half-hesitant sort of way, eye me curiously or compassionately, and then, instead of saying directly, how does it feel to be a problem, they say, I know an excellent colored man in my town, or I fought at Mechanicsville, or do not these southern outrages make your blood boil? At these I smile, or I am interested, or reduce the boiling to a simmer, as the occasion may require. To the real question, how does it feel to be a problem? I answer seldom a word. And yet, being a problem is a strange experience, peculiar even for one who has never been anything else, save perhaps in babyhood and in Europe. It is in the early days of rollicking boyhood that the revelation first bursts upon one, all in a day, as it were. I remember well when the shadow swept across me. I was a little thing, away up in the hills of New England, where the dark Housatonic winds between Hoosac and Taconic to the sea. In a wee wooden schoolhouse, something put into the boys' and girls' heads to buy gorgeous visiting cards, 10 cents a package, and exchange. The exchange was merry, till one girl, a tall newcomer, refused my card. Refused it peremptorily with a glance. Then it dawned upon me with a certain suddenness that I was different from the others, or like, mayhap, in heart and life and longing, but shut out from their world by a vast veil. I had thereafter no desire to tear down that veil, to creep through. I held all beyond it in common contempt, and lived above it in a region of blue sky and great wandering shadows. That sky was bluest when I could beat my mates at examination time, or beat them at a foot race, or even beat their stringy heads. Alas, with the years all this fine contempt began to fade, for the worlds I longed for, and all their dazzling opportunities were theirs, not mine. But they should not keep their prizes, I said. Some, all, I would wrest from them. Just how I would do it I could never decide. By reading law, by healing the sick, by telling the wonderful tales that swam in my head, some way. With other black boys, the strife was not so fiercely sunny. Their youth shrunk into tasteless sycophancy or into silent hatred of the pale world about them and mocking distrust of everything white, or wasted itself in a bitter cry, why did God make me an outcast and a stranger in mine own house? The shades of the prison house close round about us, walls straight and stubborn to the widest, but relentlessly narrow, tall, and unscalable to the sons of night, who must plod darkly or in resignation, or beat unavailing palms against the stone, or steadily, half-hopelessly watch the streak of blue above. After the Egyptian and Indian, the Greek and Roman, the Teuton and Mongolian, the Negro is a sort of seventh son, born with a veil, and gifted with second sight in this American world. A world which yields him no true self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, the sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. The history of the American Negro is the history of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. In this merging, he wishes neither of the older selves to be lost. He would not Africanize America, for America has much to teach the world and Africa. He would not bleach his Negro soul in a flood of white Americanism, for he knows that Negro blood has a message for the world. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man, for a person, to be both a Negro and an American, without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in his or her face. Thank you.
What an amazing evening. Skip, Evelyn, thank you for the vision for tonight. And honorees, thank you for your lives of service and your labors of love. Let's bow for the benediction. God, we thank you so much for the remarkable lives of these honorees. Thank you for Tammy Robinson and for Richard Plebler, for Ingrid Saunders Jones, and for Tavis Smiley. Indeed, our hearts and our minds have been warmed and inspired. And so as we entered to learn, let us now depart to serve. Amen.
Amen.
toils and snares I have already come. 'Twas grace that come, oh, and brought me safe this far, and grace will lead us your grace. Give us your power. Amazing grace.
Thank you, children. Thank you, brothers and sisters. Thank you, everybody. Good night. Let's give it up to our award winners one more time. Yeah. Okay, come on.